What's up, party people? It's Sunny Ray, and we're on the Building on Bitcoin show. And today I've got a very special guest. I've got Dean with me. Dean, how's it going, buddy?
How we doing? Great to be here.
I am well. I'm well. Nice to see you again. I mean, I'm trying to think. When was the first time we ever crossed paths? 4 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, long time
Yeah.
ago for sure.
Yeah. Actually, I think I remember. Did you guys not sponsor one of my events? I think at Bitbuy, maybe way back in the day.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
That
I
would have
think
been
that
2019, probably 2019, 2020.
Yes, yes, sir. So let's begin. We're going to talk about obviously WonderFi. We're going to talk about Bitcoin. But, before we get into the details, I'd love to, just put a spotlight on Dean's kind of past before Bitcoin. So tell me, so what does your story look like? Where are you from? Maybe share some interesting stuff that maybe we haven't heard before.
For sure. Yeah, so from Toronto, went to Ryerson, major in finance, minor in accounting. My last summer, I interned in corporate restructuring and was fascinated by the industry. We were taking possession of companies, putting them through restructuring processes, looked at a variety of industries, variety of different business situations in terms of how companies end up in these unfortunate circumstances. Out of school, continued my journey in corporate restructuring, worked for a few trustee firms over the following 4 years. Really fascinating experience. Got to explore a lot of different industries, like I mentioned, a lot of unique cases in terms of how businesses end up in trouble and the various ways that you can navigate those processes. In some cases, there are going concerns where you can sell the business and return pretty good. Uh, you provide pretty good returns for the creditors. In some cases, the business is unviable, but you sell off certain components to generate whatever you can for the creditors. So really learned a lot. I was put in a unique position where when you take possessions of companies, you ultimately are running the business in some capacity through that restructuring process. And so at a young age, I was able to have quite a bit of responsibility across a variety of industries, got to meet a lot of different people, learn a lot about, business in general. And so that was overall a really exciting opportunity. I was at the point of my career where I was going to have to pursue the licensed insolvency trustee designations to further my career. And I always had this desire to try something entrepreneurial. And I made the decision to try what it was Bitbuy at the time for 2 years and try growing a business instead of putting them through restructuring processes with the understanding that, if it was unsuccessful or wasn't for me, I would always fall back on my career in restructuring and pursue the licenses and carry forward. And so fortunately, I have not gone back to restructuring or pursued my designations. I joined Bitbuy in 2018 as one of the first four employees. And really from there, we've been able to grow meaningfully as the industry has evolved. Our business has as well. We grew Bitbuy from about 3 or 4,000 clients and about $25 million of trading volume in 2018, my first year. Of course, my first year in crypto, Bitcoin and crypto retrace about 85% as well. So we had to deal with, lack of interest, shareholders that lost interest, a declining user base, but we were able to make improvements to the platform. And in 2021, we had a really strong year. We generated about $3.5 billion of trading volumes, $33 million of revenues, and we're fortunate to organize a sale of the BitBuy business to WonderFi. And that's how I ended up where I am today. And, through that process, we have then used WonderFi's position as one of the few public companies in the sector to consolidate many of our competitors to really create one of Canada's leaders across the digital asset trading ecosystem.
Amazing. I think that was a nice broad kind of highlight of, what's been going on. Uh, Amazing. Hey, just to double click a little bit on the restructuring side. So any like kind of counter examples or common themes you noticed, like things, mental notes you made during that time where you're like, when I'm in the driver's seat, I am not going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be many examples. I think there's a whole host of examples. One company in particular, I remember they were having cash flow problems and they had shred claims that they hadn't filed that would end up generating, I believe it was like $3 to $5 million for the estate. And so you think about a business that is moving at such a fast pace that is getting into, cash flow problems, but has the opportunities to generate $3 to $5 million from a shred claim, those are examples where, you can really shoot yourself in the foot. Other examples, you see a whole host of, it really comes down to cash flow management, I think, primarily, and not overextending yourself. I think a lot of these businesses ultimately were reliant on credit lines and had secured creditors in some capacity. And so a lot of them would easily overextend themselves and tap into that credit probably more aggressively than they otherwise should have. So, Bitbuy, we were fortunate to really grow organically. It took us really about 2 to 3 years to find our stride, but our first year we didn't even draw salaries, and so really focused on managing cash flow and growing the business and focusing on spending money in a prudent manner and on areas that would drive real value for the business. We also got to work on a few fun examples. There was one Ponzi that we worked on that it was just you know, a sham of a business. And so you get to see sort of the other side of the coin where it's just pure fraud. Which really you learn a lot from, what to look out for and, sort of, when things sound too good to be true, they often are. And I sort of think about that, in connection with, while we're growing BitBuy, you have all of these examples of, Voyager and Celsius coming out with these expanded offerings, offering unrealistic yield on every asset, all of these small cap tokens. And I remember, the BitBuy team thinking to ourselves, man, it'd be amazing if we could offer some of these products and be more competitive. But again, we focused on, core competencies, not overextending ourselves. And we just didn't really think that that model was sustainable, despite the fact that so many of our peers were, finding incredible success, albeit in the short term, with those offerings. And then, you think about the other side of that coin in and around, call it, 2022, when all of those businesses unwind, rather famously, it's sort of another good reflection point for us, right? So, we always look to be transparent, focused on regulation, focused on building our business organically and on our trajectory. And I think over the long period of time, a lot of those competitors no longer exist. And, here we are as Canada's market leader. So, I think those are some examples that we've, taken. And, one last one, in middle of 2018, we identified a business that was building its own exchange and had spent, quite a bit of money on R&D and recruiting a really good engineering team. And, middle of 2018, no one was investing in crypto, right? You're sort of talking about Bitcoin in the 2 to 3,000 range, coming off the bubble of, 18, 19,000. And so sentiment was incredibly low. And we were able to, convince this business to merge with, a relatively small and unknown Bitbuy at the time, with the idea of taking their technology, pairing it with our brand and our experience in operating Bitbuy, and really bringing together the best of both pieces. And so, through that process, I had to restructure that team once we closed the deal and focus on the pieces that were going to be critical to BitBuy's success. So primarily focused on retaining the engineering team, some of the product team, and pairing that with what we had at BitBuy. And so that was an example of identifying value and being able to restructure that team in a way where it could blend in with BitBuy and get the best out of both. And that led to us launching the full exchange on BitBuy in April of 2019. And, that was a pivotal point for us early on where, we were operating this brokerage, BitBuy. Our technology was okay, but we had learned a lot about operating this business. We had a lot of great ideas for how we could grow this business, and we were able to accelerate ourselves significantly by pairing it with really good technology and a group of about 7 engineers that significantly improved our overall capabilities as a business. And so I think a lot of it has stuck with me, and a lot of it was really valuable experience over the 5 years or so that I was in the sector.
Cool, amazing. Hey, Dean, so take us back a little bit, maybe again before, so you went to Ryerson. You said you studied finance?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what was your kind of like view of the traditional financial system before, let's even a couple years before you came across Bitcoin? Yeah, like if you could kind of contrast it to like where
Yeah, I mean,
we
I
are
think,
today.
look, as a kid, you always have a limited view on things and you don't have a lot of experience to pair with it. I think probably as did most at that time, it really felt like the only path from a career perspective to pursue, right? There weren't many alternatives. Tech was certainly growing in stature and in terms of career opportunities, um, but less so from a finance degree perspective, right? And so in many respects, the traditional financial, services industry felt like the only natural step that you could take. And so, I was fortunate where I found corporate restructuring that has a little bit of variety and a bit more flavor than I think most uh, jobs within that broader sector. And so I was quite excited by the work I was doing and the variety, right? Like, you're taking over a construction business, you're taking over a media business. So you're getting a lot of different variety. And like I said, every business, sort of had its own rhyme or reason as to why it ended up where it did. So that I was fortunate to fall into, that field truthfully. But with respect to coming out of school, I mean, the traditional financial services sector was really all that you would look at and consider. You think about now the way fintech's grown. I mean, there's so much opportunity for people coming out of school. And I was talking about this with someone yesterday, like, as a young individual coming out of school, you think about how much you can learn at a startup. You wear multiple hats, the company's growing, or it's, even if it's not growing, you're thinking about everything you learn through these processes, success or failure. It's really such a good opportunity for young people to learn a lot at a young age and on an accelerated basis. And so, I was fortunate to fall into, startup world, albeit a bit later. But I think it's creates such a interesting alternative for people coming out of school now. And I would really encourage people to at some point, and I think about coming out of school where your responsibilities are lighter than they will ever be. And you think about getting older and having kids and a wife and all of these responsibilities, it becomes harder to take a chance and be more nimble. But I think it's sort of the world shifted meaningfully since then. I think there's just so much more opportunity, whether it's tech, fintech, obviously crypto has evolved meaningfully now, where you can just get a lot of experience at an accelerated pace. And I think network is a big part of that, where you never know what will come from it, right? And so I think it's important. I would recommend anyone certainly coming out of school to try and get some of that experience where they can.
And before before again your Bitcoin days, right? Was there like a kind of a defining moment that really opened you up to considering, decentralized tech like Bitcoin? Did something happen, or was it,
Admittedly, it was really after the fact. When I was
Mm.
joining Bitbuy, it was in and around October, November, December 2017. Obviously, crypto was all over the media, everywhere you looked, people were talking about it. This was its first real run up, and it definitely had gotten mass appeal at that time. My brother was trading it. I admittedly was not, so he was super into it at the time. But I remember thinking about the opportunity and thinking about, okay, here's something that has created so much excitement and attention around it, and here's an opportunity to really understand it, firsthand behind the curtain. Going to work at a brokerage or exchange, I'm going to learn more about this industry than I would by investing in it. And so I did take a bit of a leap of faith in terms of joining the industry. But what I saw was an industry that was clearly accelerating and an opportunity to join a young company and have a big impact. Little did we know that prices would decline by 85, 90% the first year I joined. But yeah, there's a lot to learn through that process as well that has stayed with me through the various cycles we've since experienced. So I don't think there was, I would say I was fortunate, that I was curious enough to take the opportunity. But certainly in terms of, that eye-opening moment, I definitely remember, one of the first, large settlements we did with a liquidity provider when I joined. And you're talking about transferring, a few $1 million of Bitcoin at night to, someone another counterparty. And I just remember looking at the cost of that transaction and just being, blown away. You're talking about, I can't remember if it was $1 or $2, but it was something like astronomical. And, I remember talking to the founder of Bitbuy at the time, we were doing the transaction together. I was just like, okay, I'm starting to understand, the value here more than I ever have firsthand. So I think that would have been one of the moments where I really started to realize, the opportunity that this technology was providing, and the value that it was creating.
And so when and how did you first come across Bitcoin? Was it your brother that you alluded to
Yeah,
earlier that
yeah,
yeah? So
yeah. It would have been my
tell us
brother,
a little bit about that. Like
Yeah, it would have
what's
been my brother, texting me, "Hey, I'm trading this Bitcoin thing. It's doing well." Screenshots of my portfolio up and to the right. Hey, you should check this out. And then, of course, simultaneously at the same time, the industry was just getting so much attention in traditional media, right? But it's interesting, like having been in traditional, financial services at the time, there was such a, in many respects, probably still true, like such an easy ability to just dismiss this asset class as a scam, a fraud, a trend, right? Like, I'm surrounded by, you know, traditional accountants, traditional, lifelong career, financial services participants, and it's just so easy for them to dismiss it. And I think that's changed quite a bit, but there's still a large, contingent of people in that arena that just ultimately dismiss the asset class without doing any work. And so, I'm sort of counterbalancing, my brother's excitement, all the attention in the media. I'm surrounded by people that are convinced it's a fraud or a trend or whatever it might be. And so, ultimately, I was curious enough and luckily, young enough to take a chance and really see for myself, what it was. And I think one of the, you know, I guess for me, one of the ways I sort of justified it was, okay, I could always fall back on this more traditional career arc if things don't work out. But I'm at a point where, I'm curious enough about it, and I think there's enough opportunity around it to really see firsthand, what this really is. And so, it's sort of interesting dynamic at the time, and certainly, the people I worked with thought I was absolutely insane, for making the move. And in many respects, they may have been right. Things didn't play out the way they had, but certainly happy with making that decision today.
Yeah, yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, so take us back to those early BitBuy days. So you joined, what was your first role at BitBuy?
I was the head of finance at the time,
Mm.
and there would have been about four of us or five of us at the time, and head of finance, but all of us, chipped in wherever we could. We'd be writing customer support tickets. We'd be going to the bank to push wires. Our bank would be shutting us down. We'd go find other banks. We really focused on trust and transparency. And so we were working to get our financial audits in place. We were focusing on building out, compliance programs that were best in class within the industry. And so, I remember one of my first hires was a CAMLO to help build these from the ground up, policies and procedures that would ultimately allow us or make it a little bit easier for us to get banking partners and build sustainable relationships. So quickly I took over compliance as well and helped build up the policies and procedures and the compliance infrastructure. And simultaneously we're looking at, okay, how can we improve this product? Bitbuy, when I joined, was a buy only platform. How do we introduce selling? How do we introduce other assets? How do we introduce the ability for users to send their crypto that they have purchased elsewhere to us to liquidate it? How do we improve the Interact e-transfer process? It sounds like, a lot of the basics, but we had a platform that was in market that was used by, like I said, 3 to 4 thousand people at the time. And so we had a good foundation to just continuously improve on. And, despite the fact that crypto was down 85%, we were seeing continual growth, albeit incredibly small numbers at the time. We were seeing more people sign up, our existing clients trading more, happier with the service. And so there was this positive reinforcement for us, despite the fact that, the industry was sort of burning to the ground outside of our, where we were. We just were committed and stubborn and kept chipping away, albeit, with a real focus on trust, transparency, and compliance. We understood the industry was in its infancy, and we understood that for it to get mass appeal and become regulated and where we are today, there would need to be those actors that were committed to doing things right. And so, sort of like I said earlier, really taking a slow and steady approach and really looking at building a long-standing presence for a Canadian platform. But those early days were crazy. We were, running around doing everything we could to get attention and going to events and just trying to have an impact and grow the business by any means necessary, like a true startup grind mentality. So, again, you learn a lot in those moments. There were successes, there were failures, there were many moments where it all could have ended. But we persevered. We had a small group that was incredibly committed and worked tirelessly to really bring this thing to life and make the most of it. And like I mentioned, I think one of the big turning points for us was when we were able to acquire that tech company that was building its own exchange and really bring in that technology to kind of underpin the hunger and the attitude that we had to really complement the platform and give it a lot of you know well, I guess position it in a way where users could have a really genuine experience that they enjoyed. Pair the brokerage with the exchange and focus on liquidity and best pricing. And so, those early days, you certainly cherish them in terms of like, where you came from and the size and scope of the business, but more importantly, like what you did to just will this thing into existence.
Have you heard that quote, like chewing glass and staring into the abyss?
Yeah.
Does it sound
Yeah,
a
yeah.
bit
There were definitely a
familiar?
lot of days we'd stare into the abyss wondering what the hell we were doing.
Right? Right?
Yeah. And it's funny too, like as we're getting going, this is like 2018, crypto industry sort of falls off. In Canada, the cannabis industry is getting all of this attention, all of these resources, these financing rounds for these businesses with little to nothing, underlying. And, we're just scratching our heads like, fuck, did we, pick the wrong sector here? Again, another component, I guess, that I didn't touch on in those early days is like, we had very limited resources, and you're in an industry in Canada, in crypto, where it's coming off of this, 20K run, where it was incredibly hard, if not impossible, to raise money. And so, we were incredibly under-resourced, looking out at all of these cannabis companies raising 10, 15, $20 million. But again, it was just sort of the mindset that we had that we were just going to will this thing to existence. Like I said, the principals, didn't take a salary in 2018 to, bring in staff to help support the business, to focus on marketing, to focus on, the few dev resources that we had at the time. So it really was just willed into existence in many respects. Um,
Beautiful, beautiful.
yeah.
So your brother gets you intrigued. Bitbuy pulls you in. You're still a bit timid. You have this experience where you do a couple $1 million transaction for a fee of $1. You're starting to see the light. But at what point do you dig your heels in and do you go, I'm gonna see that Canadians adopt this technology, right?
Yeah. I think for us, like for me, it was probably in and around the time we launched the exchange, which would have been about April 2019. And at the same time, we launched our mobile app. And so, thinking, okay, the industry more or less craters in 2018. And, we're able to improve our offering. We see a bit of growth in 2018 because we're able to improve the product organically. 29, and we have a path to launching this exchange, which should really improve our positioning in Canada. And, come 2019, probably mid 2019, we have the exchange live, we have the mobile app live, we launch an OTC desk. And so we have a really well-rounded offering that we built up over a year and a half that we're proud of, that's significantly improved. We're seeing pretty good growth, albeit within the context of where we were as an industry. And I think at that point, we were dug in. The Bitcoin halving in 2020 was around the corner. I think we said, we've built something that we're proud of, that we think can compete in Canada, that can onboard Canadians and be one of the better platforms. We built up a really strong compliance program. We had developed, stable banking partners through that. And, we really had put together all the pieces, call it by mid 2019. And so, we said, okay, things are starting to improve industry-wide. There's a Bitcoin halving around the corner. We've really built up this product in a way that we think it can be competitive. And so we owe it to ourselves to at least see it through, this halving cycle and see if, things pick up. And if they do, we feel really good about how we're positioned and our abilities to compete in Canada. And so that was when I think, I had dug in, certainly from a business perspective. I think at that time I was really starting to, be more and more encouraged by the overall industry, its ability to, I remember its ability to survive. Like, when I joined, January, February, March 2018, you're talking about governments banning Bitcoin and outlawing it. And is it going to zero? And is it going to be shut down? And, through that process, it just continued to survive and continued forward. And, it had its volatility, but it also, just remained popular and remained, something that people wanted and people saw value in. And so its ability to just survive these moments, and we've had a few more of them since then, it really just reinforced my belief that this was something that had a long-term value and would continue to be an attractive investment opportunity to more and more participants as the years passed. And so, I think, like I said, yeah, probably around mid 2019. And then, you're starting to get into early 2020, and, things really did start to pick up for the business and the industry. And, I think that's where, things really started to take off for the business. And so that just ultimately, just was a bit of a flywheel where the business is accelerating at a rapid rate. And, my belief in the industry just, continue to grow, sort of, simultaneously.
So you're now heels dug in, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, FTX happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I
What
mean,
did
that,
you
that, that
learn?
came a bit later, but yeah.
Right, a little bit later, right? But what
Yeah.
what what did that inform you about the kind of Bitcoin's resilience? Because that was another one of those like
Oh, yeah.
Mount Gox type moments.
Exactly.
It's like,
Well,
it's
that's exactly.
over. You're getting uninvited from family dinner parties, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's
Yeah,
back to square
exactly.
one.
Yeah, that was another one. And so that would have been in, I guess, 2022. And so, timing is everything. So when I joined Bitbuy, the market sort of collapses. We finally build up Bitbuy. We sell it to WonderFi. We have all of these, really great ideas on how we can accelerate growth within the WonderFi story. And then, Three Arrows, Voyager, Celsius, and then FTX, like, all collapse, and then the industry just sort of back to where it was more or less, in terms of negative sentiment and questions around the long-term viability. It's interesting. I think I became CEO of WonderFi, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before the collapse of FTX. So couldn't have happened
Oof.
a better time, right? So, but
Oof.
again, like having the experience, I had in 2018, really helped navigate those moments where, as grim as things were, sort of isolated to bad actors, right? And, again, like you never sure how long things will be bad for, but I was pretty sure that we would see another side. So, you just gotta, sort of focus on your core strengths, contain costs, keep team morale high. And, the team you have through those moments ultimately see the world similarly to you. Otherwise, they'd run for the hills as quick as they can. So you really end up with a strong team that believes in the industry similarly to the way you do. And, at that time, like, everyone around you thinks the industry is going to crash and burn. But again, you think about, a year later almost, fall 2023, things really pick up around the excitement around the Bitcoin ETFs. And you think about, what a difference a year makes, like it's incredible. But we used, it's different being on the public company side. In 2022, as bad as things seemed, we were confident, in the long-term trajectory of this industry. I had learned a lot from 2018 and the resiliency of Bitcoin and the industry. And, like I said, 2022, it was really limited to five or six bad actors that were, really intertwined. And when you think about, that impact on the long-term trajectory of the asset class, really it's an isolated event. You're not sure how long it's going to impact the industry or slow things down, or the long-term effect it can have on negative regulation. But the long-term trajectory we were still very confident in. And so, in early 2023, we used that to our advantage. We acquired three competitors in 2023, and I think a lot of that was driven by the negative sentiment around the industry. And so we were fortunate to use that to our advantage to grow WonderFi significantly. And like I said, by Q4 of 2024 or 2023, excuse me, everyone was thinking about these Bitcoin ETFs launching in the US, and sentiment improved incredibly quickly. And, obviously we all know how strong of a year 2024 was. And, you think about how quick things can change, right? And so we were fortunate to complete these acquisitions when we did, and to have the conviction that we did, because they've had a really strong impact on WonderFi. So, I think having that conviction in the industry, it creates opportunity for you when these negative moments actually occur.
And maybe take us through that timeline, because are you allowed to share what the acquisition valuation was of BitBuy, or is that's public info, no?
Yeah, BitBuy was public. So that was
Wasn't it
the
like
value at the
200 or
time was
something?
206 million. Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, that's got to be some sort of like record or something in Canada, no? I mean, you don't hear about $200 million acquisitions happening in Canada. Like that's like congratulations. But take us through kind of the sequence of events in terms of, BitBuy being acquired, and then I think it was like Coinberry and CoinSmart, and
Yeah.
you guys just like literally went after the entire industry. But like
Yeah.
how did that
So
even happen? I mean, you took advantage of the down market, but yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so WonderFi acquired BitBuy, and there was a clear view of using WonderFi's position as a public company to go out and acquire more competitors. And so when it acquired BitBuy, I joined WonderFi's executive team as the head of exchanges, with the view of helping WonderFi identify other exchanges to acquire, and then assisting in the integration and sort of the broader restructuring of all of the teams into a single team, for WonderFi. And so quickly after the BitBuy acquisition, which closed in March 2022, we completed the acquisition of Coinberry in July 2022. And we spent the better part of 2022 integrating those two businesses, bringing the teams together, developing a strategy to bring the technology infrastructure together, and getting the synergies of effectively one operating team managing two platforms. And as we just talked about, the back half of 2022 was largely negative sentiment, focused on FTX, Voyager, Celsius. And through the tail end of 2022 and into the early 23, there was an opportunity to acquire both CoinSquare and CoinSmart. So that was a deal we announced in April 2023, closed it in July of 2023. That was a really big turning point for us. Really bringing in CoinSquare, which was one of the biggest exchanges in Canada, created significant scale. BitBuy and CoinSquare together, that really creates a lot of scale for WonderFi, which we've now gotten the benefit of. At the same time, CoinSquare had the only zero license in Canada for crypto trading platforms. And so we're able to consolidate all of these platforms under the only regulated dealer in the country, creating a lot of value for WonderFi as well. And so those transactions closed at the same time in July of 2023. And in the fall of 2023, we acquired Bitvo, which was a Calgary-based crypto trading platform that had more of a institutional client profile, but really complemented our business overall. Obviously, Bitbuy and Coinsquare offer retail and institutional trading services through institutional being through the OTC desk. And so we're able to acquire really good users through that acquisition as well. And so when you think about it, from call it March 2022 to, tail end of 2024, we're able to acquire, WonderFi, able to acquire, five regulated crypto trading platforms in the Canadian market. Through that process, we've really created the leader in Canada. And, having closed those acquisitions, in 2023, we had a very defined focus through the end of 23 and into early 2024 to integrate all of the platforms onto one tech stack. And so that process, I believe, was completed in and around May of 2024, the final process where Bitbuy merged into the Coinsquare regulated entity and tech infrastructure. So today, anyone that has signed up for Coinberry, CoinSmart, Bitvo, Bitbuy, or Coinsquare historically is all on one trading tech platform inside one regulated entity. And so we've really created, the economies of scale, the cost synergies, the efficiencies from a resource perspective that we identified all the way back in, early 2022. And it's really come together well. At the same time, obviously, the industry has turned around meaningfully in terms of sentiment and price performance and adoption. And so it's really come together, really well. Again, at the same time, you think about acquiring these five platforms and all of the individuals that contributed to building them and growing them, we've been able to put together a really strong team of, the best operators, the best marketers, the best compliance folks in the country. And, I think it really reflects well when you look at the platform we have, the user base we have, the volumes, and, we're really proud of what we've put together.
Not to mention, quite possibly the most famous billionaire Canadian, like going on the news every day talking about you. How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, so Kevin was involved with WonderFi at a very early stage, and I think he was quite influential in the name WonderFi, if you couldn't guess. So he was an early investor, and he's had a really strong outlook on the industry. He's been very steady, in terms of his belief for the asset class, and through that, he's continued to support WonderFi, obviously through the ups and downs and the volatility. But he's continued to be a shareholder and a strong supporter. So having, someone like that, involved obviously provides significant value, whether it's, his network or his advice. It's been a really big asset for us in terms of building out our profile publicly and in terms of building relationships within the industry and globally, right? This is a global business leader that has a very deep Rolodex, and he's been helpful where he can be and continues to offer support. So it's been a massive resource, and he was actually quite helpful in the acquisition of Bitbuy by WonderFi in the early days. He was very involved in those early days.
Amazing, amazing. So, I mean, to the extent that you can share, what are you guys working on in 2025 that'll kind of, that you're excited about that will further Bitcoin adoption in Canada?
Yeah, so look, in terms of Bitcoin adoption in Canada, obviously we're focused on continuing to grow our platform organically, focusing on user acquisition, the adoption. We've spent a lot of time thinking about, how the election upcoming could potentially impact, broader regulation and how we could help influence some of that. Thinking about, different products and services that we can integrate into our platforms to make them more robust and cater to our broader audience. With Bitcoin specifically, we're looking at ways that you could utilize your Bitcoin to, pay bills, pay taxes, pay your friends, and just use it more regularly and get more comfortable with holding it and utilizing it if you're not a long-term holder. In terms of WonderFi as a whole, we're looking at expanding our trading platforms capabilities into Australia. We think that's a really good opportunity for us. It's a similar market to Canada, similar regulations, similar demographics, similar adoption rates. And so, we acquired a small platform last year that has the licenses that will allow us to operate in Australia. So that's something we're excited about launching this year. We launched a non-custodial wallet as well earlier this year, EVM compatible. The team is working on building out Bitcoin support for it as well to make it multi-chain and really build out a trusted, transparent platform for Canadians that are looking to not only buy Bitcoin, but custody it themselves or utilize it on chain for a variety of reasons, and really help educate them on that process as well. So that wallet has an integrated AI chatbot that really allows early participants to ask questions, understand how some of these protocols work, understand some of the capabilities, and really help guide them through that journey. And so that's something we're excited about. We think introducing Bitcoin capabilities and support is really important to the long-term success of that wallet. And separately, we're looking to build out a layer 2 blockchain as well. That'll be obviously EVM compatible. But again, thinking about where we see long-term success for some of these layer 2 blockchains, we think a lot of it will originate with the exchanges. You have the user base, you have the assets, and you have the knowledge of operating regulatory compliant platforms. And so we really think that the exchanges, and it's not surprising, you've seen Coinbase launch Base successfully, Kraken recently launched Inc. And you'll start to see, in my view, a lot of the successful L2s just largely be associated to or operated by exchanges. And I think there's obvious reasons there. So, we're definitely keeping busy this year. There's a lot to be excited about. And, a lot of it is all underpinned just by the continued adoption we've seen within Canada for digital assets and Bitcoin. And we just expect that to continue to grow. You think about the impact that the Bitcoin ETFs have had in terms of, removing some of the stigma around the asset class, really allowing more institutional players to get exposure to it, which will just create more comfort around the asset class more broadly. And so we think that trend will continue. Obviously, the Trump administration has been quite supportive vocally about it. Obviously, they haven't done a lot within the first few months, but if you think about over the course of a 4-year administration, we certainly expect there to be favorable and meaningful regulation in the US around stablecoins, exchanges, likely around DeFi as well. So that will really allow the industry to grow and become more competitive. Obviously, the volatility remains, but we're super confident in the long-term outlook of the asset class and just looking to have a bigger and bigger role in it and continue to offer Canadians and soon, Australians a platform that they can trust and use to acquire, hold, and utilize Bitcoin and other digital assets.
Dean, we went from chewing glass, staring into the abyss, to you just casually dropping the fact that the most potentially powerful person on earth, at least that's what I was always, taught, that the United States president carries a tremendous amount of power. Now being a Bitcoin evangelist, now stating things like how they're going to potentially put Bitcoin on as a strategic reserve asset. What a 180-degree shift. Like juxtapose, what you were feeling, whatever, 5, 7 years
Oh
ago to what we're going through now.
Oh yeah. Well, look, we still chew glass, as you know, but we still have glass to chew, but we've made a lot of good progress. And look, I think, through all of the ups and downs, the FTX moments or the 2018s, like you think back on all of these moments where things could have gone, wrong, or moments where the industry was called into question, and you think about where we are. I mean, that just gives me the conviction to keep moving forward, and that there is clearly something here that has a long-term presence and will continue to be meaningful on a global stage. So, that just gives me the positive reinforcement to keep going and keep building.
What percentage of Canadians would you say own Bitcoin or I guess some sort of crypto digital asset? I
I
mean,
think
if anyone's
I
gonna
think it's
have a good
between
guess.
like
Yeah.
I think it's between like 10 and 12%. I think there have been a few studies done. I believe it's between 10, call it 10%.
That's quite high, no, compared to the rest
Yeah.
of the world. What would you say
Canada is
globally?
actually one of the highest, has one of the higher adoption rates globally for crypto. Australia is up there too. I believe Australia's was 13%, last I checked. So yeah, Canada ranks high. I think a lot of that is, some of the, early days where you have Ethereum, launching out of, Toronto, and, some of these early day, decentral, and there was a big, presence in the early days that I think has sort of resonated, um, because it's higher than you would probably guess, right? In terms of how conservative Canadians are often viewed, uh, for the most part. So, I think that's, something we've been pleasantly surprised with, and that's obviously been helpful for us in terms of growing out our business. Has been the adoption and the way in which Canadians actually, accept and embrace crypto.
And just going back to the chewing glass thing, what kind of major challenges do you foresee in the near future? I think you kind of alluded to the political landscape in Canada a little bit, talked about the United States, but yeah, anything that stands out in terms of things that maybe doesn't keep you up at night, but
Yeah, I
you
mean, look, I think for us in Canada, we always think about, how fast the industry evolves, and there's regulation in Canada for, spot trading and for staking, but there are so many other products and services that Canadians want access to. Think about margin, derivatives, decentralized applications, and, I think for us, it's important to work with regulators to understand, how the industry evolves, and some of these other platforms and products that we need to offer to remain competitive. And at the same time, if Canadians aren't going to access these products onshore through regulated platforms like ours, ultimately they're, going to find a way through a VPN to an offshore unregulated platform that puts them and their capital in danger, right? And so it's really about, how do we expand the offering? How do we give Canadians the products and services that they expect to utilize with respect to crypto more broadly, and do so in a regulatory compliant manner? So working with regulators on, how fast the industry evolves and all of the products and services we want to offer is definitely a challenge. Being a public company within this industry in and of itself, presents challenges that we weren't even aware of in 2018. And so, navigating that as well is obviously, a challenge. You're talking about a relatively young asset class, and you're talking about, um, competing against some of the, some global giants in terms of the capital markets for eyeballs and attention. And so, we got to think about ways to, really tell the story and be front of mind in front of as many people as possible. So that's obviously, an element to this business that's evolved through the acquisition by WonderFi. But like I said, we've got a really good team here. The team has, significant belief in the asset class, and, they're going to will this thing into existence as we continue to drive forward.
Well, Dean, I'll give you a few minutes back to your day here. You are a true inspiration to all of us here in Canada. It makes me proud to even call myself a Canadian, to know that, you guys have had this beautiful success story. I only got through maybe half my questions, but I would love to do this again if you're up for it. And thank you so much for
Absolutely.
your time, man. This was a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
man. Always good to connect, and we'll do it again.
All right, cool, man. With that, I will bring this one to a close. Hey, just maybe share with people really quickly the website, Twitter handle, anything you want to share where people can learn more about WonderFi.
Yeah, sure. WonderFi, you can go to wonder.fi to learn more about the company, bitbuy.com, coinsquare.com to learn about the platforms, sign up for them if you're interested. And, on Twitter, Bitbuy and Coinsquare for any and all information, and WonderFi as well. We post a lot of industry relevant content and news and information. So it's a great resource for anyone that is just looking to stay, interested and relevant with the industry.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.